Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight, 5 full weeks into Putin's horrific war in Ukraine that's targeting civilians, killing 148 children so far, according to Ukraine's defense ministry. And we just learned that 1 person died and 4 were injured when Russian militants shot at a column of volunteers near Chernihiv today who were trying to help civilians evacuate. This war is not going well for Putin. His soldiers are sabotaging their own equipment, according to the UK spy chief. And a U.S. official told NBC that we have information that indicates that some Russian government senior officials likely disagreed with Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Their disillusionment is probably amplified by the Russian military's underperformance. The Kremlin is on defensive, denying reports that Putin is being told false information about how poorly it's going because people are too scared to tell him the truth. Meanwhile, Putin signed a decree today drafting more than 134,000 new conscripts into the Russian army. They're being told that they are not being sent into Ukraine, but it's important to note that Putin also denied that conscripts had been sent in earlier in the war, and that turned out to be a lie. In fact, the use of conscripts may be why the invasion went so poorly in the first place. They tend to be younger, less motivated, and poorly trained. The Ukrainian government announced today that they're regaining territory, liberating 2 villages in the Chernihiv region, and claiming that Russian equipment is currently being moved away from Kyiv and that Ukraine is recapturing villages there. Yesterday, my colleague Richard Engel visited an abandoned Russian camp on the outskirts of Kharkiv.
This was a Russian camp, and you could see they had all of their weapons here, dugout positions, and they were bombed. There's still some bodies in this area, and they left a lot of their equipment behind after what appears to have been a devastating attack on their position. There's nothing left.
While the area might be back, in Ukrainian control, what civilians have gone through is harrowing.
88-year-old Praskovia was sitting by herself, disoriented and frightened. I'm so afraid. My whole body is shaking. At night, I cover myself in a blanket and I shake, she says. Mostly, she wanted comfort. Praskovia says she lived through World War II and doesn't have the strength to go through it all again.
And it's certainly far from over. Kharkiv is under constant attack, with Ukraine saying Russia fired 47 strikes last night alone, and that Russia is refusing to allow humanitarian corridors there. Humanitarian corridors did open up today in Mariupol, which has been relentlessly besieged by the Russians. President Zelensky said today that thousands of civilians have died there. NBC News is unable to verify that number. Just under 1,500 people were able to evacuate the region today through 3 corridors. But Russian soldiers seized 14 tons of humanitarian aid, including food and medicine. This is all a part of Russia's focus on the eastern part of the country, where Ukrainian officials say Russia is considering sending their own officials to preside over occupied territory. Russia claimed to take over another territory in Donetsk today. Of the Ukrainian government, where the head of the Ukrainian government says they're using white phosphorus munitions. This is a claim that NBC News has no way of verifying. White phosphorus is not banned by international law, but if the weapon is used to target civilians, it can represent a violation of the laws of war. The Kremlin has said that they haven't violated any international conventions. The capital, Kyiv, meanwhile, even as Russia struggles to advance on the ground, they've still been striking Kyiv. And the NATO Secretary General said today that Russian forces are not withdrawing. They are just regrouping. Here's what President Biden had to say on that today.
It's an open question whether he's actually pulling back and going to say, I'm just going to focus on the Donbass and I'm not worried about the rest of the country. I'm a skeptic. It appears so far that he has not pulled all of the idea. He's pulling all the troops out from around Kyiv and moving south. There's no evidence that he's done that.
Joining me now from Lviv is Ali Velshi, MSNBC correspondent and the host of Velshi. And Ali, my friend, it is so hard to sort of understand what the narrative is here because the narratives all appear to be sort of all at the same time. Russia is failing in its military objective, but they're killing and slaughtering a lot of people and destroying lots of territory. They're either pulling back or they're just stalling in order to go in harder. Is it possible from where you are to get a sense of which of these things is true or all of them true?
Yeah, or is it confusion, or is it deliberate disinformation? It's very, very hard to tell. And what you were hearing and showing, what you just described, is the sort of conflicting types of intelligence that we're getting, right? They're British intelligence suggesting that some of these conscripts, these Russian soldiers, are sort of protesting. They're sabotaging themselves. The idea that they were pulling away from Kyiv and neighboring areas in order to build trust during those negotiations, well, we have evidence that that didn't happen. There was shelling that was continuing to occur in those places. This idea that they want to focus back on the Donbass and the eastern region of the country, and that the focus on Kyiv and other places was just meant to be a distraction. It becomes impossible to tell what the truth actually is here. And as you said, we can't confirm all of those things, but you can see Richard Engel's actual reporting. We have seen reporting from our colleagues at Sky News that shows the actual destruction of residences, apartment buildings, and things like that. And it sort of plays out even here in Lviv, which was thought of as a very peaceful place, which seems like a very peaceful place during the day. Right now, obviously, we're under curfew, so nobody can move around. But even people here who came here for safety have been saying things like there's no safe place in Ukraine. So at this point, it becomes very, very unclear as to what is actually going on. The important thing, and it's a message that's coming from the U.S. government, but it does seem to bear out on the ground here, is that the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers, with the assistance of the weaponry and training that they're getting from the West, is seeming to hold them together. Now, they've warned several times that they're running out of stuff. Yesterday, that conversation with President Zelensky and President Bush, which lasted an hour, did result in $500 million more being sent to Ukraine. But that money, interestingly enough, is to run their government. This is not a rich country. This is the poorest country in Europe, and they are struggling to run their country and conduct this defense against Russia. So it's unclear. I think the only thing we're clear on is one way or the other, this is not going the way the Russians thought it was going to go, because we had reports of 72 hours or 96 hours before they take the whole place. It's not clear whether Vladimir Putin understood that not to be true, or he thinks he's been duped by his own people. But something's not working for the Russians, and that is about as much as we can be clear on.
Yeah, you know, Mother Russia has been fooled before by the same sort of scenario. It's almost as if they thought, well, Afghanistan, the capital of Afghanistan fell quickly. We're just going to do that, and now they've sort of built themselves another Afghanistan the way the Soviet Union had it, a mess. Ali Velshi, stay safe. Thank you, my friend. Really appreciate you.